Blog Talk Radio.
To Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I want to welcome all of you to the show this evening. I'm going to be covering Contact Report 136, probably our last show in Contact Report 136. We're going to talk about past lives prophecy, the gods of the earth, and more. I want to give you a quick rundown on some of the guests that we have lined up for October and November. Wednesday, October 1st, Kosal will be back. Saturday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we'll have Melanie Houston. At least that's tentative. I've got Frosty Woolridge on in the evening, Saturday, October 4th, 8 p.m. Eastern. Larry Driscoll's going to come on October 8th. That's a Wednesday night, 9 to 10 p.m. On October 11th, Saturday, we've got Susan Purcell, Kevin Barrett on Revolution Radio, Robert Steele on the 18th, Revolution Radio, James Bartley on the 25th of October, Revolution Radio. And I'll just run down the Revolution Radio guests for November. All of these will be Saturday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Alfred Weber, Sophia Smallstorm, Michael Horn, Sheldon Neidel, Frosty Woolridge, Robert Steele, Dave McGowan, Courtney Brown, James Horak, and I might throw in a Billy Myers show as well. Edward Albert Meyer is a one-armed farmer from Switzerland. He's 77 years old. He is living in a little town called Hinterschmidruti, which is about an hour east of Zurich. He's had extraterrestrial contact since about the age of 5 years old. His first contacts were with an extraterrestrial man named Svath. When Billy was just 5 years old, back in 1945, he would get these telepathic messages to go out into the forest near his home in Bulak, Switzerland. And one day he was in the forest as a very young boy looking down at some fish swimming in a stream, and in the corner of his eye he saw this silvery pear-shaped craft land or just hover a few inches above the ground, and out stepped this elderly man who was really over 1,000 years old. His name was Svath, And he was from a race of extraterrestrial humans that originally allowed themselves to be called the Pleiadians, but they're not from our Pleiades. They're from the Pleiades star system, about 80 light years beyond our Pleiades, in a different space-time configuration. Our Milky Way galaxy is about 100,000 light years across, if you can imagine that. But it's also divided into separate time planes, different space-time configurations. For example, there's a Sirius system in our time plane, in our space-time configuration, and there's a Sirius system in another space-time configuration. So we don't understand completely the nature of the universe, the nature of life, the nature of time, the nature of matter. But we're learning. And these people who tell us that their forefathers are our forefathers live on a world very much like the Earth. It's about the size of the Earth. It has a very similar ecosystem. It has a much higher oxygen content. And the civilization there lives in very much harmony with nature. They don't build roads. They don't drive vehicles on the surface of their planet. They don't pollute their water. They don't pollute their air. They don't have money. They don't have war. They don't have disease. They don't have hunger. Their existence is very much a utopia compared to ours. And what they've done is, some way or another, they've been able to bring a very ancient, highly evolved spirit here to the Earth. And he's been incarnating here on the Earth since about 8,903 BC. His first incarnation was as a man named Enoch. He wrote the Enoch prophecies, which are talked about in Contact 215. They mention some very disturbing things that could happen in our future. Probably the most shocking one says that the greatest disaster in recorded history will happen in North America when nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons are released by automated systems which run outside of human control. There are all kinds of interesting prophecies in the Meyer material. In Contact 136, we've talked about some of these prophetic events. Contact 136 took place in October of 1980. And here are some of the prophetic events talked about in Contact 136. The assassination of John Lennon, the engagement of Prince Charles of England to Princess Diana and her death, the start of what we call our extreme cold weather, severe earthquakes and floods in various parts of the world. Contact 136 talks about the rise of Zionism. It also discusses how Ronald Reagan set the stage for World War III by turning America into an incredible military power. It goes on to talk about the assassination attempt, where John Hinckley tried to kill President Reagan. Contact 136 talks about the attack of the Israeli Air Force on the atomic power plant in Iraq, in Osirak, Iraq. It discusses the corruption in the Vatican, and it's interesting, it refers to the Vatican as the Holy See. It discusses the assassination attempt of Pope John Paul II, Ayatollah Khomeini's illness, death, and the Iran hostage issue. It also mentions that Ronald Reagan will be struck by Alzheimer's disease. Another thing that's mentioned is the assassination of the president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and it also talks about the institution of the peace meditation by the Plejaren. Now Sfath, who was by this time 1,000 years old, would be Billy's teacher for 11 years. And Sfath brought Billy into his ship and took Billy some 70,000 meters above the earth. And Billy saw the earth from a perspective that most people here on the earth will never get to see. He really saw the big picture, and that's one thing the Meyer material does, is it does allow you to see the big picture. And Billy looked around inside the spacecraft and he could see what he thought were windows or portals, but they were actually viewing screens, and on these viewing screens were people. And Billy could see all sorts of people. Sfath put a device on Billy's head that allowed Billy better access to the wisdom of his predecessor personalities. Now, according to Meyer material, Edward Albert Meyer has been Enoch, Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Emmanuel, and Muhammad. And each time he lived one of these previous lives, he taught something called the teaching of the Spirit. And the teaching of the Spirit can be divided into what I would say are 5 different areas. One being the universal consciousness. The second talks about the human spirit, reincarnation, learning to control our thinking, and taking responsibility. So these 5 areas, the teaching of the Spirit really focuses on. And Billy will teach this information as he has in previous lifetimes. And eventually, the teaching of the Spirit will bring in a time of great prosperity here on the earth. A time when love, peace, prosperity, freedom will occur in various areas of the world. Sfath told Billy to stay in the background because the people of the earth make for themselves idols. He was warned that later that year in 1945 that the Japanese would drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that the people of the earth would then go into what's called the third millennium, which is a time of confusion and a time of maliciousness. However, I think we can mitigate these times, particularly if we focus on the spiritual teaching. And as Billy said in a later writing, the incredible splendor of nature is the visible expression of the love of creation. And I have a clip here I want to play that's called Rainforest Beneath the Canopy. I think there's a little gap here in the beginning.
The heart of the rainforest. Here we can discover the secrets of a world 100 million years old. The forest has survived from prehistoric times, outlasting the dinosaurs. Huge trees stand like monuments amidst the symphony of life. Shrouded in a translucent veil, millions of living organisms compete for light beneath the canopy. Layer upon layer, life here exists in harmony. Trees in the rainforest have been known to live as long as 350 years and grow to nearly 200 feet tall. Throughout the forest, trees seek sunlight. Its energy allows them to process the nutrients they need to survive. A soft carpet of moss covers these ancient Arctic beech trees as they reach ever skyward in search of the light. Water, the great sustainer of life in the rainforest. These rivers and streams are the veins and arteries of the rainforest ecosystem. The rainforest canopy shields its vulnerable inhabitants from the harsh surrounding elements. It also serves as a home. High up in the trees, we can find birds living among the branches of the canopy. In some areas of the rainforest, the moisture in the air forms a fine blanket of mist. The mist filters the sunlight into a soft haze. Elsewhere, beams of sunlight cut through the forest, creating dramatic glowing rays. Looking high into the canopy, countless trees can be seen competing for their place in the forest. Further below, however, other forms of life are involved in their own struggles. The forest teems with insect life. Nature's tiny soldiers. They are inhabitants of almost any location on Earth and flourish in the lush and fertile world of the forest floor. Imagine for a moment the enormity of the world as these creatures see it. Every stick and leaf would compare to the size of a building or a freeway. Their day is busy with exploration and foraging for food. Ants follow the trails of other ants. With complex and subtle chemical communication, ants can talk perfectly to one another. Many creatures travel the same pathways, is this caterpillar. It's a lonely, solo journey. Different insects have their own ways of getting from place to place. Rainforest creatures have an amazing variety of special abilities. Many insects are masters of disguise. This creature resembles a piece of bark and moves slowly, almost invisible to potential predators. For some animals, blending in is not high on the list of priorities. This beetle's metallic shell reflects the light, a warning to birds and other predators that there are better options on the lunch menu. For tiny insects, every detail of the environment is an enormous landscape. Although small, they play a large part in the life of the rainforest.
Even before Billy met Sva, he had this great love for nature. And one evening, as a young boy, probably 4 years old or so, 3 a.m. one morning, on a mild night in May in 1941, Billy climbed out a low window in his bedroom, and he sat down on a bench, and he looked up at a beautiful starry sky. And he felt what he called an invisible light, which later he identified as the radiating love of creation. And he heard this voice in his head that said, "My life is made from the love of creation. And since ancient times, I've lived among the stars." And he recognized that the light which the stars emitted was a visible light, but there was an invisible light which was creational and for all time. You see, the creation we really have to think of I think of it as two separate parts. The physical universes, and the superintelligence that runs everything. Semyase put it this way. She said, love and wisdom go together, and the creation and its laws are love and wisdom at the same time. Later, when Billy was much older, he would write something called Love Letter 27, which would state that the incredible splendor of nature is nothing but the visible expression of the love of creation, and that creation radiates love, so that at every moment we can sense the radiating love of creation. Every tiny plant and every tiny animal in creation fulfills its purpose. And rivers, lakes, streams, bushes, trees, everything that crawls and flies on the earth is a life form with a spirit form. And these spirit forms are on a journey through time, which involve many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth, rebirth into the world of pure spirit, and that many of these creatures are connected by psychic vibrations, and that they all communicate with one another. Let's listen to our next clip on the rainforest.
As the cool air blows in off the ocean, humidity builds over the forest. The air is heavy with condensation, culminating in the spectacular and frequent downpours that give these magnificent regions their name, rainforests. There's a quiet still as the brooding clouds draw near. The first droplets of rain fall, a teasing prelude to the approaching downpour. Rain falls in vast quantities in the forest, with millions of liters pouring down each day. It falls in greater quantities than in any other environment on Earth. The plants will only absorb about 1/4 of the rainfall. The rest will soak into the soil, flow into the streams, or simply evaporate into the air, creating the humid rainforest environment. Long after the rain has stopped, drops of water continue to fall from the leaves and branches of the canopy, eventually trickling to the forest floor. Groundwater continues to flow, freshly joining myriad streams that weave through the forest. For some trees, this can prove disastrous. Having grown so tall in the desperate quest for sunlight, many trees lack the root structure to stay upright in the softened ground. It can be a dangerous world, where each day is a battle for survival. But with each drop of rain, the canopy is open to new light. New plant life is given its chance to strive for the top. Early in the new day, we find the rufous fantail. This mystical and rarely seen bird uses a spider's cobweb to stitch her nest together. She has scouted the forest for small twigs and fine grasses that will enable her nest to withstand the harshest of weather conditions. The multicolored king parrot. This magnificent bird eagerly feasts on sweet berries, taking advantage of the morning light. The rainforest is home to many amazing wonders, like this giant fungus. It spreads its spores by releasing them as a fine powder into the morning air. This beautiful landscape provides all the essentials for raising a family. The rufous fantail takes every precaution to keep her eggs from harm. She is an alert mother and guards her eggs jealously through the long incubation. Lush moss. It thrives near the crisp, clean waters of the river stream. Tiny structures draw moisture as the water flows past. Even fallen trees play an important role in the forest, providing food and shelter for other plants and animals. Toadstools, spectacularly translucent. These tiny wonders are a fascinating sight as they perch on the sides of rocks and trees. Small droplets also cling to delicate leaves and branches. These beautiful formations reflect light like tiny crystal lenses. Magnificent colors and patterns can be revealed throughout the forest. We find magical detail everywhere, from the tiniest leaves to the spectacular hues of the animals and birds. The vivid red and green colors of the king parrot, the multicolored lorikeets, and the intricately patterned feathers of the catbird. Amidst all the change within this busy world, we also find a tranquility like no other. Far from human development, we find nature in its purest form. Gentle streams of crystal clear water flow freely through this endless maze. Another day slowly draws to a close. Sunset. Ancient tribes believed that the last colorful rays of light were a gift from the gods. As the sun slowly sinks in the sky, it signals the end of the day shift.
The creation is the universal consciousness. It's the superintelligence which created our universe. One of Billy's later contacts, a woman named Semyase, would explain that even your ancient philosophers here on the earth said that everything was within the human. That within the human is the microcosm within the macrocosm. And we have in our circulatory system the branching structure that's also seen in plants and trees. In our bodies, we have molecules where electrons rotate around the nucleus of the atom, and in space we see planets rotating around stars, and stars rotating around galaxies. We see repeating patterns in nature. Nature's full of repeating patterns. The superintelligence behind all these repeating patterns is neither good nor evil. It creates universes as a part of its own evolution. And there are universes within universes, universes beside universes. Our universe was created 46 trillion years ago, along with a parallel universe called the Tao universe. Now, Billy's second contact was a woman from the Tao universe. Her name was Asket. Her people are called the Timmers, and they came into our universe and into our space-time configuration and to the Earth to avert a great war, to avert a nuclear disaster that would have not only affected Earth, but planets outside our solar system. And Asket also came here to play a role in Billy's teaching. And Billy was taught by Asket from the time he was 16 years old to roughly the time he was 27. And I often tell of the story when Asket took him far below the Giza Plateau, down to these old cubicle constructions that were some 72,000 years old, where Billy and her saw the headquarters of the Giza intelligence, this giant hallway where the light came from everywhere and nowhere. They saw a giant spacecraft and guards and a Y-shaped cross. And Billy was very moved and shocked by all of this, and when they got to the surface, Asket explained that roughly 10,000 years ago, after the fall of Atlantis, there was an extraterrestrial man who came here named Eris the 11th. He was one of the descendants of a man named Eris the Barbarian that was here during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria, during the time when the great civilization of Atlantis and Lemuria was destroyed. And there was a very small group of people who were pulling themselves out of the rubble of Atlantis and Lemuria. And this is centuries later, no doubt, when these extraterrestrials came. And they were the gods of the earth. And in the book, the Om Phala and Marado, as it's called, the navel of life, it says, the gods of the earth were human. They came from the expanse of the universe, from strange systems, galaxies, and worlds, and they unjustly set themselves up above the earth humans, and they demanded worship. And they claimed to be the creator, but they weren't. They were human. And some of these gods fell into degeneracy. And they gave commands that caused strife and division among the people of the earth. And some of these extraterrestrial space travelers even committed murders. Eventually they wandered off, or they died off. But these ancient gods still exist in our myths, in our legends, and in our mindset, and in our religions.
To the Greeks, Demeter and Persephone became symbols of the seasons of nature. When Persephone was above the earth, it was said that Demeter blessed the land with the fruits of spring, summer, and fall. But when Persephone was in the underworld, the earth suffered a cold and barren winter. This cave is where many Greeks believed Persephone emerged from the underworld. The Eleusinian cult began here in Eleusis, where Persephone was said to have been abducted. The Eleusinian Mysteries was a secret cult, but one in which anyone could be initiated. Ancient Greek poetry and artwork provide a window of knowledge about this mysterious religion. Each fall during harvest time, people made a pilgrimage to Athens from all over Greece to participate in a festival, to ask Demeter for abundant harvest and for information about what would happen to them after death. The festival opened with a herald announcing that anyone whose hands were free of pollution, meaning they hadn't committed murder or any other blood crime, could step forth as a candidate for initiation into the cult of Demeter. The initiates were required to bring a sacrificial piglet, which they first carried down to the sea to cleanse and purify. Then they would fall into a solemn procession, often of over 15,000 people, walking from Athens to Eleusis. Once they arrived, the piglets were thrown into large pits as gifts to the goddess. Modern archaeologists have unearthed these ancient pits, as well as votive offerings, that shed some light on the public rituals of the Eleusinian Mysteries. But what about the private initiation ceremonies? According to ancient inscriptions, every member who was initiated was sworn to keep secret whatever he or she had seen or heard during the rituals. One initiate into the cult later wrote, "The dream forbids me to write what lies inside the sanctuary wall, and what the initiates are not allowed to see, they obviously ought not to know about."
The secrecy was taken so seriously that once 2 Argive teenagers were caught spying on the rituals, and death was the result. They were punished with death because it was not proper for them to see these events that were forbidden to people who were not initiates.
Somewhere in this field of silent stones is where some historians believe a large fortress was built to conceal the ceremonies. One theory about the Eleusinian Mysteries suggests that initiates were given an hallucinogenic drug derived from buds found on sheaths of wheat, the symbol of Demeter.
One of the most popular cults in antiquity. It went on a long time, and it was one of the big rivals to Christianity because the Christians were very concerned to discredit it as far as possible, so it must have been a big competition for them.
Demeter was not the only divinity who was honored with a mystery cult. Greek women, whose lives were often consumed with domestic drudgery, sometimes became involved in the orgiastic cult of Dionysus, the god of wine. Dionysus was born of an affair between Zeus and his mortal lover, Semele. However, the pregnant Semele was killed in a plot orchestrated by Zeus's jealous wife, Hera. It was said that Zeus later rescued his unborn son from Semele's womb and sewed him into his thigh. When the time was right, it was said that Dionysus ripped through the stitches and was therefore twice born. Since his birth was the result of a love affair that ended in death, Dionysus became the god of ecstasy. The cult dedicated to Dionysus spread like wildfire. In the wilderness of ancient Greece, it was said that Dionysus intoxicated his female followers with wine and song. They were then transformed into enraptured dancers, floating in a trance-like state of euphoria.
They describe a kind of ecstasy of being able to get out of themselves, and I think that is part of what that cult is. You are able to get away from your work, you're able to get away from whatever the normal confines of life are, and go into the mountains or go into the woods and have a good time, at least for a day or two. That's part of that religion, and I think that made it so exciting.
It was said that Dionysus also had a dark side. He could lure his cult members into bliss or murderous deeds. At times, his female worshippers would be induced into such a frenzied state that they would slay animals and rip small children into pieces so they could eat the flesh and drink the blood. Men were warned to stay far away from these women when they were possessed by the god. Yet the worship of Dionysus was a sort of safety valve for women narrowly restricted in ancient life. These are the remains of the Theater of Dionysus located in Athens. Here are stone seats bearing the names of the priests who were chosen as caretakers of the shrine. But all that remains from the stage are headless sculptures which symbolize the legend of Dionysus. He was said to have brought light and heat to the earth. His cult following was larger than any other. His name, Apollo, god of light, music, and prophecy. Apollo was the second generation of Olympian gods, the son of Zeus and the goddess Leto. He was born on the island of Delos with his twin sister Artemis, goddess of wildlife. The handsome Apollo was the epitome of youth. His powers were said to be awesome. Every morning he mounted his chariot and rode across the sky like a fiery ball, providing energy and light to the world. But like most of the Olympian gods, Apollo possessed evil traits as well. At times he was the deliverer of plagues and darkness, and according to the writer Homer, Apollo once descended from the heavens, shooting his arrows into both animals and men.
Another interesting aspect of the Greek gods is that they do not seem to be intrinsically good or evil. They didn't start out being good or evil forces, but rather a mixture, the way human beings are a mixture, with different kinds of impulses.
The god of light did have a weakness for nymphs, goddesses, and mortal maidens. At one time he fell hopelessly in love with a nymph named Daphne, who was incapable of returning his affections. It was said that Apollo chased Daphne through the woods. The beautiful nymph quickly transformed into a laurel tree. When Apollo approached the graceful branches of the tree, he proclaimed that if he couldn't have Daphne as his wife, he would make the laurel tree sacred. And so the laurel wreath became the symbolic prize that Greeks awarded at the Olympic Games. Apollo was not only known for his sexual conquests, but also for his ability to perform amazing feats. In the city of Delphi, Apollo was said to have slain a fearsome python with his arrows. The peasants in the area rejoiced at the death of the snake by making Delphi a sanctuary for Apollo. Since he was known to possess the gift of prophecy, ancient Greeks claimed that Apollo's oracle existed at Delphi. By the 8th century BC, it became an international sanctuary, and pilgrims traveled there to make an offering and ask advice. They stood in line to talk to the Pythia, a priestess who was usually a local village woman. She was said to possess the gift of prophecy and served as the interpreter of the oracle. The priestess would go into a trance-like state by chewing laurel leaves or inhaling vapors from a nearby fissure, said to be the navel of the earth. The priestess would then babble incoherently, and a male priest would translate her message. Typically, Greeks would ask the oracle if a battle should be fought, or if they should marry, or where they could find a lost child. Individual cities in Greece eventually pitched in to build an ornate temple to Apollo, although many ancient Greeks believed that Apollo himself built his first shrine out of laurel branches. On the roof of this crumbling columned wonder were once inscribed Apollo's words of wisdom, such as "nothing in excess" and "know thyself." Today, little remains of this sanctuary except its majestic setting. While Apollo was worshipped for his oracle, his son Asclepius often...
Maybe it's a good time to take a little break. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We're studying the Billy Meyer case this evening, and we're listening to appropriate clips here and there to kind of dramatize certain ideas and thoughts that are given in the Meyer material. Let's take about a 3-minute music break, and we'll be back shortly. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are studying the Billy Meyer case, and I just played a clip talking about the Greek gods. And one of the canons, or you could almost call them chapters, in the OM, the book of the OM, is called Canon 52, and as I quoted it earlier, it says, the gods of the earth were human. They came from the expanse of the universe, from strange systems, galaxies, and worlds, and they unrightfully set themselves up above the earth humans, and they created religions, and they demanded worship. And some of these gods degenerated, and they committed murders, and they gave commands which caused strife and disunity among the people of the earth. Now, in ancient times, if we go back to about 10,000 years ago, after the destruction of Atlantis and Lemuria, there was a civilization that was climbing out of the rubble of the destruction of this two earlier fantastic nations, let's call them, Atlantis and Lemuria. And these people, it took them centuries to recover because the earth had been devastated during this great war, and there was a pole shift. And the first one of these quote-unquote gods to come back was a man named Eris the 11th. And he was the ruler for about 2 or 3 centuries. And I believe he had a son. His son, if my memory serves me correctly, his name was Jehovah. And Jehovah took over for Eris the 11th. And Jehovah had a son, Jehav. And Jehav took over for his father. And eventually, a man named Arisane came into power. Now, Arisane murdered his father, Jehav. And that was the pattern of these quote-unquote gods. They would murder their fathers, and then they would take over leadership, and they would proclaim themselves as the creator. And there was kind of a mind control that went on to the people of the earth, or the people that had survived this destruction, because they were living in a primitive way. They were trying to survive. Anyway, when Arisane murdered his father Jehav, he eventually got pushed off the earth by his younger brothers, Ptah and Salam. But Arisane came back to the earth. He snuck back, and he settled far below the Giza Plateau in these old cubicle constructions that I was talking about at the beginning of the show. And he set up the Giza intelligences. And then eventually Arisane and his followers became known as the Giza intelligences. And Arisane ruled until about 3010 BC. And then a man took over who was called Hen, who was also known as Jehovah. Now, Hen was eventually, in about 2080 BC, forced out of power by his nephew, Kamagal I. And Kamagal I was pushed out of power by Kamagal II, which I guess was his son. Now, this is the quote-unquote gods that were there following the Atlantis and Lemuria timeline. Now, the Giza intelligences, they were on the earth until about 1976. And they influenced the people in the Thule Society in Germany. They influenced Hitler, but they were eventually pushed off the Earth in 1976. They had a technology called telekinetic impulses, which still influences the people of the Earth today and will influence us for a couple more centuries. Anyway, if you want to read more about this, you can head on out to the Future of Mankind website. And this is discussed in Contact Report 70, as well as Contact Report 9, and probably others, I believe. Also, it talks about this to a certain degree in Contact Report 7. And if I can digress just a little bit, it kind of follows along our topic of the gods of the past. When Atlantis and Lemuria, before it was destroyed about 11,500 years ago, there was some genetic engineering that took place, and there was some just cohabitation and interbreeding which took place. And we here on the Earth are the offspring of star travelers who mated with wild, primitive humans who were developing here on the Earth. Contact Report 7 says, but they are all equally the product of the celestial sons. They were begotten of them, just like the still existing Earth races. The celestial sons or star travelers, as we call our ancestors, were native to various planets of stars in another space-time configuration, far away from the solar system, where the planets were fundamentally different climatically. Consequently, they also produced other races who were able to adapt themselves to being here. Now, these extraterrestrials that came here in the past were very diverse in size, and they ranged in size from about 50 centimeters to about 39 feet tall. The smallest ancestors of the Pleiadian extraterrestrials were some 50 centimeters high, while the largest were 12 centimeters. A centimeter is about 0.39 inches. So these extraterrestrials, the short ones, were 19 inches tall. The tallest were over 39 feet tall. And some of the differences in the height of the extraterrestrial humans that originally came here came from systems where the gravity was different. So there was a well-known scientist who came here. He worked under Eris the Barbarian. His name was Semyasa. And he was the first, my understanding, was the first to mate with an earth woman called an Eva. And the descendant of their procreation was called Adam, which is a word meaning earth human being. The original Adam stood about 16 feet tall. So our ancestors were extremely tall. So this is roughly the story of the gods of the ancient past. And how the history here on the earth has kind of been muddled up and mucked up. And we really don't understand who we are. And we're so blessed to have this information from the Mire material to fill in some of these gaps about what happened in our ancient past. And also so we can understand where it is that we come from and what has happened here on the earth. Now, a couple shows ago, I talked about this concept called the God delusion insanity. And I was recently sent a PDF by a woman who works closely with Billy in Switzerland. Her name is Marianne Eulinger, and she wrote a foreword for Billy's book, God Delusion Insanity. And she describes that the belief in these gods kind of got, for lack of a better word, mixed up with the original knowledge of creation, of the universal consciousness. So now our religions are extremely confused. And to them, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, the Muslim faith, Christianity, that the Creator now has taken on these human characteristics where he's angry and he's bitter and he's jealous and he gets involved in human wars. Now, according to Meyer material, this belief is kind of a genetic thing which is passed down, and it's very similar to epilepsy or schizophrenia. And when people are involved in these very extreme religions, they can go into these delusional states where they do very strange things, much like a person with an epileptic fit or a schizophrenic fit will do. And I think that's why we're seeing some of the extreme activity in some of the Muslim world. And that's something we're going to have to learn to cope with as time goes on. Now, another interesting thing I've been studying lately in relation to the Meyer material and in relation to our physical universe and our Milky Way galaxy specifically is something I'm going to have to eat a little crow about, because it's something that I got wrong. And even Billy had a wrong idea about this as well. And I managed to stumble across Contact 228, which talks about the universe. And it tells us the visible universe is only one of 7 belts, which we've talked about before. And I believe our material belt is the 5th belt, where all the galaxies and stars and suns are. And the Meyer material refers to the creation as a double spiral egg-shaped configuration. And it says that our Milky Way galaxy has around 587 billion suns. But at the same time, there are 7 million smaller and larger solar systems with planets on which higher life exists. Now, that isn't necessarily human life. I thought it was. I thought there were 7.5 million human civilization, but no. It says here, known to us in this galaxy are only 2,630,000 highly developed human civilizations, which actually belong together. So that's a much smaller number than I had originally thought. Now, there are 7 million solar systems that can support higher life. And that's kind of comforting. Maybe someday we'll be able to move on. I think we've probably taken this planet too far to the brink with our incredible population, which is destroying the natural world, destroying our planets our forests at an ever higher rate. Now, it's interesting that the Plarian estimate that in our universe, in our space-time configuration, now keep in mind there are multiple space-time configurations, but just in our space-time configuration, in our universe, there are 6 to 7 trillion human civilizations. That's their estimate. Our universe is 46 trillion years old, and it will expand up to the point of about 555.5 trillion years old, and then it will start its contraction process. You can almost think of that as the life and death process of a universe, and then it will expand again. So the creation has the physical aspect as well as the spiritual. And we see these repeating patterns in creation. And we're told that whenever we see something beautiful, whether it's a flower, an animal, or a human being, or anything else, it should constantly bring us into association with the infinite beauty of creation. And we should be able to trace all of our happiness back to creation. Remember, creation radiates love, and all the beauty of nature can be related back to the beauty of creation. Every time the human being sees cognition reach expression, he can relate that back to the cognition of creation. Creation exists in every human being as a fragment of itself. Knowledge of the creation can help us with inner peace, security. Our personality will actually become more powerful the more we know about creation. And in Contact Report 18 it says, the more his intelligence is effective in this direction, the more it gains radiating light, the more powerful his personality becomes, the more blessed his entire work and life. Remember that creation radiates love, so that every day we can come up against the radiating love of creation. And being able to sense the radiating love of creation is a spiritual process. In the German, it's referred to as Empfinden. And it's a spiritual process that involves a part of our spirit body called the Gemüt. And the Gemüt controls our spirit-based thoughts and feelings. We have spirit-based thoughts and feelings. Our human spirit lives many, many, many lifetimes. And that death is just the passage to rebirth, and rebirth into the world of pure spirit. So when we die, the human spirit comes out of the body, and it goes into this etheric band of energy around every planet that supports higher life. And the universal consciousness takes our past life memories and stores them in the storage banks. And eventually, at the appropriate time, our spirit is placed back in the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. And the comprehensive consciousness block comes down and gives us a new personality. And all the information and all the wisdom of our predecessor personalities is stored in our subconscious. And we'll get inspiration from those predecessor personalities. We'll get impulses from the storage banks. And our scientists are now understanding that we do reincarnate and that we do live many, many lifetimes. Here is some reincarnation information by a scientist named Ian Stevenson.
This little boy is referred to as Sam in case studies. A year and a half before he was born, his grandfather died.
When he was about 18 months old, his dad was changing his diaper one day, and Sam looked up at him and said, "When I was your age, I used to change your diaper."
Since 1996, Dr. Jim Tucker, a psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, has been gathering case studies of past life recognition in children that could prove that a soul returns to Earth in another body.
We've now got 2,500 cases in our files from all over the world.
Many people believe in some form of reincarnation. The concept dates back to 800 BC and the Hindu Upanishads. Beginning in India, the belief that some essential part of ourselves may return after death to a new body is now being examined by some scientists as another way to prove the survival of consciousness. Can the study of past life recollections support this theory? The answer may lie within young children's memories.
Very young children, usually between the age of 2 or 3, who start reporting that they have memories from having had a past life. Some of them talk about being deceased relatives, but others will talk about being strangers in other locations. And if they give enough details, like the name of the other location, people have often gone there and found that, in fact, someone had died in the recent past whose life matches the details that the children gave.
The late psychiatrist Dr. Ian Stevenson advanced the field of reincarnation research in the 1960s interviewing over 3,000 people who claimed to have past life memories. 2/3 of them said that in a previous life they died from unusual causes. He focused on 25 cases in India and realized that young children talking about past lives was much more common than anyone had known. Dr. Stevenson created categories to screen for cases worthy of further study. His colleague, Jim Tucker, still uses this method.
The criteria we use to decide whether to register a case would include two of the following characteristics: a prediction of rebirth, an announcing dream, a birthmark or birth defect that seems related to the previous life, statements of memories about the previous life, behaviors that seem related, and then also recognitions of people or places from that life.
Sam's story is an example of how a small child may express what some believe are memories of a previous life.
When Sam was 4.5, his grandmother died, and his father went out to take care of her belongings. When he came back, he brought a group of family photos, which before that, Sam's family had not had any of his father's family photos in the house. One night, Sam's mom had them spread out on the coffee table looking at them when Sam came over and started pointing to pictures of his grandfather.
Mommy, where did these come from?
Those are pictures Daddy brought back from Grandma's funeral.
That's my car.
You see that picture?
Turned out that was the grandfather's first new car, and one that he was very attached to. His parents had no belief in reincarnation. In fact, his mother was the daughter of a Southern Baptist minister.
Sammy, come talk to Mommy for a minute.
It's just a coincidence.
Sam's mother became intrigued by her son's statements. She started testing him with questions about his grandfather. She showed him a class photo of when his grandfather was in grammar school.
Sammy, do you recognize anyone in this photo?
There I am.
No, Sammy, that's your grandpa when he was a boy.
No, that's me.
When I looked at the picture, even after having looked at the other pictures of his grandfather, I really would not have been able to say with any certainty which boy I thought was the grandfather. And of course, Sam was 4 at the time that he did this.
Some children not only remember their past life, but the afterlife as well.
About 20% of the children will describe events between the time when the previous person died and when the child was born. Some of them describe basically sort of hanging out either where the previous person lived or where the previous person died. So they may describe their funeral. Then there are other children who talk about going to other realms like heaven, things like that. Some of them will talk about seeing other beings there or talking with God.
I died and shot up to heaven. God gave me a ticket that let me come back down to earth.
This is not part of our everyday experience to have people talking about past lives. If the children are able to describe memories that then turn out to be accurate for somebody who lived and died in the past, then this suggests that memories or something connected with memories can carry over possibly after the death of the body. I've had a number of friends and acquaintances who have said that their children, when they were 2 or 3, would make one sort of unusual statement. Like there's one woman who said her child said, "In my last life, I drove a big truck." This is as they were riding down the road one day. Never said anything else. And, you don't make too much of that. But in these cases, the children don't stop after 1 or 2 statements.
When children continue to talk about having had a past life, they may offer more specific details.
Do you remember your family?
Some people turned my sister into a fish.
Who turned her into a fish?
Some bad guys. She died.
The father had only recently heard about the sister being murdered 60 years before, and then her body had been dumped in the bay. And he felt absolutely certain that the boy had never heard about it.
Some people point out what they...
I've got an interesting clip here from the Meyer material that talks about previous personalities. Let me play this clip.
If you think about the reason why we are responsible for the mission, then you will also certainly think about the enormous knowledge or even the wisdom of our predecessor personalities at the time of the Great Oaths. The big question is, where is it all now? In a small toward horizon, which simply means overview but sounds more sweeping and extensive, I would like to show you where this knowledge can be found. After death, the spirit form and consciousness block pass over into their respective levels in order to process the accumulated data. I will omit the process of the spirit form, although this naturally is just as important, because the spirit form determines the exact time point of the incarnation of the consciousness block, though in some ways its different processes, as I see it, are easier to understand. When the consciousness block enters the overall consciousness block, which is external and not in our head, everything that was ever begun but not entirely completed is settled in a matter of seconds. You mustn't envisage this as some tremendous feat. Compared to the material life, it would be similar to someone remembering that he forgot to say thank you and no longer gets around to doing so. This is then simply added. Once that happened, the content of the consciousness block is downloaded into the storage banks of the overall consciousness block. All data in reality, these are impulses of the consciousness block programs, such as consciousness, memory of the consciousness and of the subconsciousness, ego/self, subconsciousness, mentality, character, personality, thoughts, feelings, psyche, unconscious forms, senses, etc., pass into the storage banks of the overall consciousness block. After the impulses are discharged into the storage banks of the overall consciousness block, the consciousness block is completely dissolved into neutral energy, which means it becomes pure creational energy. From this creational energy, the overall consciousness block then programs the consciousness block programs all over again. At first, everything is empty, only the foundation is laid. And now here is what all of you have been waiting for, the essence of our knowledge, experience and wisdom from our predecessor personalities is loaded into the new memory of the subconsciousness, which means the highest value of every single consciousness form is transferred from the storage banks of the overall consciousness block into the new memory of the subconsciousness. Everything else is empty. Only the consciousness block programs are existent, however in a completely neutral form. The former, enormous knowledge of our predecessor personalities is therefore hidden as essence in the memory of our subconsciousness, and in detail as data impulses in all the external storage banks. From there, it can be activated through our conscious searching and inquiring, because only by intercepting inspirations of the subconsciousness, and by consciously and continuously working with them, do the involved consciousness forms or consciousness levels in the memory of the consciousness evolve and create corresponding update. Naturally, all people have the same functional programs in the consciousness block. What distinguishes one consciousness block from another after their development is the data impulses in the memory of the subconsciousness. The brain cells or brain impulses of the embryo prior to the 21st day after conception merely contain the chemistry balance, which means the innate material brain functions and what is inherited from our parents. That is the hardware. If our parents were extremely belief-oriented or, for example, sport fanatics, then our temporal lobes and posterior frontal lobes harbor these unpleasant impulses, from which we have to free ourselves again through our own hard efforts during the course of life. The memory of the subconsciousness only contains facts about knowledge and what has been experienced. It is not responsible for passing on contents of belief, because belief cannot be experienced. Belief is based on imagination. However, if we allow ourselves to be hassled by religions and all sorts of fanaticism during our lifetime, we too may fall prey to a belief or fanaticism. We may also possibly tap the existing storage bank records of our predecessor personalities and thus gain inspirations of our subconsciousness in this regard, which we accept as hard facts. If that is the case, data enters the appropriate subconsciousness forms or subconsciousness levels, from where it passes into the consciousness via the unconscious. In principle, it is the same process with us former old Lyrians, who get impulses from our storage banks and appropriately put them into practice, at least those who recognize their responsibility. The body itself as well as the consciousness are animated by an impulsating spirit energy, just as a plant is. Impulsating or impulsation are new words, with the meaning equals something goes inside, something develops. The software incarnates in the form of the consciousness block together with the reincarnating spirit form on the 21st day after conception, whereupon the heart of the embryo starts to beat and the development of the basic character begins. This means that after the reincarnation of the spirit form and the incarnation of the consciousness block into the embryo, the subconsciousness exists in the form of impulsations in our brain, as do all the other consciousness block programs such as consciousness, subconsciousness, memory, mentality, psyche, personality, self/ego, thoughts, feelings, senses, unconscious forms, etc. Everything in the entire universe is composed of moving impulses or impulsations, including all cells, merely the consistency of each is different. From the very moment the spirit form reincarnates and the consciousness block incarnates into the embryo is correctly called a foetus, although this is not yet known to medical experts. They still think the embryo phase lasts 3 months instead of only 3 weeks or 21 days. Chaos rules nowhere, not in the storage banks, nor in the memory, nor in the consciousness forms. Everything is meticulously regulated. In creation, law and regulation prevail. Undetectable things in the memory of our consciousness have to do with the rubbish we deposit there continuously via incomplete lines of thought and feelings, and not with an unstructured organization.
I have another clip here that talks about Billy's second contact with a woman named Asket from the Tao universe. I probably won't play it all, but I want to play a little of this.
Asket Pleiadian Plejaren Contact Reports, Conversations, Volume 1, pages 323-3. Asket's explanation of February 7, 1953, in the mountainous region of the Jordanian desert on the Dead Sea. Word-for-word account, with Asket's memory assistance, of Asket's explanations, on September 10, 1964, in Merali, India. Asket, the time has now come in which you are to experience many things which, at a later time, will be helpful to you and many others in the search for truth. You yourself will thereby play a great role because you will become a fact of tradition. I have already explained to you the possibility of time travel into the past or future. In accordance with our technology, we are in a position to undertake such trips and to now also employ them for the benefit of your coming mission. As it has been decided, you will travel back with me into various epochs in order to be able to examine the truth of events there and then, and to recognize that your traditions and the assertions of your religious antiquity researchers, and so forth, are false and unreal and only in very rare cases correspond to the actual occurrences. But now we still have some time, and I can explain to you that which is most important. Also, I still await a visit from the man who we recently met near here. Otherwise, we will look for him in the morning and converse with him. Only after that will we make the first trip into the past together. But now I still have many explanations to provide to you first. At various times you had pointed out to you your future path through life, which will be very wearying and burdensome. Right from the start you have already experienced, and come to know, that this corresponds to the truth. But the time of your apprenticeship is not yet finished, because it will still continue for about 20 years, during which you will experience very hard times and an enormously hard destiny. Were it already very hard and burdensome up until now, in the future it will be very much worse. Yet be aware that you unconditionally must complete this learning if you want to do your mission justice. The next years will bring you into a dungeon and wartime military service outside of your homeland. You will have to pass through all stages of a fighting human in order to be able to very precisely acquaint yourself with everything. Because if you are to understand things, you can only do this if you come to know everything yourself through your own experience. It will also be the case with different vices in which you will yet indulge for learning purposes. Severe physical pain will also remain just as near to you as will psychic pain. In the earth human meaning, you will experience hell, whereby only then, however, will you learn to understand heaven. I will now say to you already, as Thoth had already done, that in little more than 10 years you will have to take the hardest test of your life up to that point. Yet also this test, in your destiny, will be necessary in order to collect much knowledge. I largely know your future because I have penetrated it, and I know that evil will befall you. A great change will take hold of your body, so you will suddenly live a completely new life. It will sound very hard for you just now, yet it must really be this way, and we are not able to change your fate, as it is not within our power. Our competence does not extend to these kinds of events. Consequently, we also cannot influence them. But it will be good for you to prepare for the coming event and to encounter the facts with clear reason. If you can do this, I will explain that which is to come. I have thought about this for a long time and have also consulted with others about whether I should do this or not, because we know very precisely that Earth humans cannot, or can only extremely rarely, cope with this kind of background knowledge. They want to be very hard and viable, yet this desire is only feigned. In themselves they are soft and unwilling, and do not want to bear their own burden. For that reason they are also never permitted to come to know important things of the future, because they are not capable of processing the knowledge of coming things. But in your case we have unanimously realized that you are well advanced in regard to these things, and you are big enough in yourself to cope with everything using reason. I cannot yet tell you the precise date on which the event will confront you whereby you will lose your left arm. But it will happen in the days between the 1st and 5th of August in the year 1965. This is determined this way for you, through your life and all circumstances, and it is impossible to avoid these events. But, until then, you have somewhat more than a decade to prepare yourself, by means of reason. I will explain the precise and wretched circumstances to you later. The further events of your future are the following, which you, however, are never permitted to tell anyone. Explanations of the future, about myself personally, about which, however, I must be silent. Explanation of Friday, February 7th, 1953. There will be further events in which, shortly before the loss of your arm in Persia, you will be called something new, in fact, the name Billy. This naming conceals within it a great significance, and will be very weighty. You will carry this name for all subsequent years, and it will bring you suffering and pain as well as slander, attempted murder and misconceptions, from outsiders as well as even from your closest fellow humans, from critics, those who are envious, know-it-alls, authorities, religions, and false prophets, and so forth. There will be extremely difficult years for you in which you will live and learn in further hells. Hate and foolishness against you will rise in your own family, whereby you will acquaint yourself with the last secrets of the human and his psyche, when someone in your family betrays you. peace will finally only slowly come for you after a long time, namely when you have already long fulfilled your own mission. Only then will the signs of peace very slowly begin for you, because you will no longer take the attacks against your life and your mission seriously. But the time until then is still long, and very many hard and wild events will roll over you. The name, Billy, intended for you, will become significant worldwide, and suffering as well as need and pain will threaten to drown you. But manage yourself in accordance with your reason and in accordance with your understanding, because these alone guarantee your life. So, 8 months after your accident, you will marry under very difficult circumstances after you meet your future wife at Christmas time 1965. The circumstances of acquaintanceship, up to the marriage in Corinth and Greece, will be defined by extraordinary evil intrigues and evil entanglements from your bride's side of the family, whereby you will be forced to kidnap your bride, who, furthermore, will be only 17 years old. Do not think, however, that after the wedding you will have gotten all your problems behind you, because the actual difficulties first start after that and will continue during all the coming years. In the first 10 years of your marriage you will produce 3 children to whom you will give very old names. You will name a girl Gilgamesha and 2 lads Atlantis, Socrates, and Methuselah. No more children will originate from your marriage, as 3 offspring per marriage is the number of the terrestrial norm. Also, the birth of your children will bring you no peace, and so the path of your learning will not have ended. Only in the...
Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed the show this evening. I certainly have enjoyed bringing it to you. You're listening to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We'll be back on Wednesday with a discussion with our friend Kosal. Have a good evening. It's been my pleasure. Take care.